Section 3.3 looks at Hong Kong Exchange and Clearing Limited. This is the recognised exchange controller, the listed company in Hong Kong, and it owns the markets. That is the stock exchange, the futures exchange, and the three clearing houses. At paper 6, we're not going to get into this structure in too much detail. Just be aware of the overview. Now, Mandatory Provident Fund Schemes Authority, Section 3.4, we've been introduced to this authority previously, and because Mandatory Provident Fund schemes must be authorised by the SFC before going into the investing public's hands, the MPFA does get a fair bit of coverage in paper 6, and we list its responsibilities as we've seen previously. Section 3.5, the Insurance Authority. Now, as I've said before, this is not an insurance exam, but we need to be aware of the role played by the Insurance Authority generally. It regulates, supervises the insurance industry, licenses the insurance intermediaries, ensures interests of policyholders are protected, and regulates insurance companies. Now, there is an interrelationship among all the regulators, and you'll see what we were illustrating in the diagram on page 18 is the central role that is played by the Securities and Futures Commission. Now, the supervision of intermediaries that are engaged in the MPF industry. If you want to organise and distribute MPF schemes, you will first have to get authorization from the Mandatory Provident Fund Authority, the MPFA, and as such it is known as the lead regulator. But the MPFA will then want to be comfortable that you are regulated by one of the three frontline regulators: the Hong Kong Monetary Authority for banks, the SFC for licensed corporations, and the Insurance Authority for insurance companies. And all of those entities do offer MPF schemes. So that is the relationship among the MPFA and the other three regulators, the lead regulator and then the frontline regulators. But this is with regard to Mandatory Provident Fund schemes. So we have the MPFA and the SFC, and we look at the different roles that they play. Let's move on to section 4, licensing and registration of intermediaries under SFO. Now, if you've done paper 1, if you've done some of the other papers, you may well have come across this material, but I would ask you to pay particular attention to section 4.1 because it is specific to the asset management industry. We're looking at the intermediaries involved in asset management. Now, obviously, we start with the asset managers themselves, fund houses, fund managers, portfolio managers. To operate, you are required to hold a Type 9 license for asset management. Then we have the distributors of the collective investment schemes of the funds. Now, in that case, you need to hold a Type 1 license for dealing in securities. If the activity is solely for the purpose of Type 9, you're likely to be exempt. What does that mean? I'm a fund manager. I'm managing funds on behalf of my clients, and I'm distributing my own product to my clients. I won't need the Type 1. However, if you are distributing other fund managers' products, then Type 1 will kick in. A dealer acting on behalf of clients investing in collective investment schemes, you will require Type 1. And again, Type 9 asset manager that markets funds not under its own management. As I've just said in 4.1.2, you would need a Type 1 license. Investment managers of open-ended fund companies, you will need to be, it says in the second bullet point, while more than one investment manager may be appointed, at least one must be SFC Type 9 licensed. And then 4.1.5, distributors and fund engaging in activities related to virtual assets. Anything to do with virtual assets nowadays If they come packaged as something that we define as a security or a collective investment scheme, then licensing requirements will apply. And the last subsection under 4.1, 4.1.6, others. Now, I'm going to go over this because I have seen questions pop up in these points. Trustees, custodians, and professionals such as lawyers, accountants, and investment advisors are these other parties. If carrying on core competency, trustee, custodian, will not be carrying out a regulated activity, generally you will not need to be licensed. So as we'll see in topic 3, trustees, custodians do not need to be licensed. If you are advising as well as these activities, you will need a type 4 license. But it's the third bullet point I would want to emphasize. Trustees, custodians may engage in other activities. These activities may require licensing. So just because you're a trustee and or custodian doesn't mean you don't need to be licensed if you're doing something else. And the example that I have seen examined, a custodian engaging in stock borrowing and lending may be considered to be dealing in securities, and you would therefore need to be type 1 license. So if you're a trustee custodian, you move into stock borrowing and lending, you need a type 1 license. Please remember that point. Section 4.2, the exclusions from regulated activities. Now, from other papers, you will have seen this before. This is standard material for the exams. Be aware that those listed do not necessarily need to hold the relevant licenses. Then we have under 4.3, conditions of obtaining a license. The second bullet point, SFC interprets the requirement, this is with regard to responsible officer, to mean that at least one responsible officer for each regulated activity must be based in Hong Kong. You need 2 per regulated activity, but at least 1 must be based in Hong Kong. Very important for the asset management industry. I've come across asset management companies in Hong Kong where they have 1 responsible officer in Hong Kong and 1 in the likes of London or Boston or New York. Okay, top of page 22, just going into the licensing in a little bit of detail. Yes, there are 2 types of license. One's for the licensed corporation, and the other is for the individuals, the representatives. The last 2 bullet points under types of license I draw your attention to. If a licensed representative ceases to act for a principal, the principal must notify SFC of change within 7 days, and the license must be returned. So this is where somebody who is licensed resigns, then the SFC must be told within 7 days, and then the SFC will in fact write to that person, telling them by which date their license will be revoked, and that date will be 180 days from the license being handed back. Board responsibility, generally boards of licensed corporations are responsible for the overall conduct, operations, etc. And then we've got more detail on responsible officers. Be aware that we need at least 2 responsible officers per regulated activity, at least 1 that's based in Hong Kong. Responsible officer can be a separate question in these exams. Okay, then we have this category now as manager in charge, and what it's noting at the top of page 23 is there's 2 categories of manager in charge that must be responsible officers, they therefore must be licensed. What that means in reality is they must sit the exams. First bullet point, examples of those that undertake overall management oversight are the CEO and the Chief Operating Officer, and any person who undertakes key business line function. The example we're giving, Head of Marketing. So that is from the point of view of responsible officers. The concept of manager in charge we deal with in a lot more detail when we're looking at the Code of Conduct. Authorised financial institutions, AFIs, we've dealt with before. The equivalent of responsible officers in AFIs are executive officers, and you require at least 2 executive officers. Now, if you are conducting a regulated activity without being licensed, you can be disciplined heavily, and section 4.6 gives you the details of the disciplinary sanctions. I wouldn't be too concerned about knowing all that detail, but be aware that it is an offence to carry on a regulated activity without being licensed. Section 4.7, substantial shareholders. The SFC wants to approve substantial shareholders, and in section 4.7 we have the criteria as to who would be considered a substantial shareholder, and also the sanctions that would be handed down if you were a substantial shareholder of a licensed corporation and had not been approved by the SFC as such. Section 4.8 just lists the information that you have to provide for your license application. I'd say that's getting into maybe a little too much detail for what we're going to be examined on. 4.9, section 4.9 is fitness and properness. Now, to hold a license, you must be considered to be fit and proper, and there's 4 main categories of the criteria: financial status or solvency, educational, other qualification, experience, ability to carry on the activity competently, honestly, and fairly, and your reputation, character, reliability, and financial integrity. Now, these criteria must be satisfied both by intermediaries in terms of financial status, education, systems, etc., and individuals. So the intermediaries is dealt with in section 4.9.1, and for the individuals that we refer to as licensed representatives, 4.9.2. Be aware of those. This is not difficult material. You should be familiar with having to satisfy these criteria to be considered fit and proper, and therefore hold a license. Now, the last section, subsection in section 4.10, looks at continuous professional training. 2 things you need to know. One is you need a minimum of 5 CPT hours every year for each regulated activity competence group. So what is a competence group? Well, the examples there are types 1 and 4, that is dealing in securities and advising securities, are a competence group. So if you're licensed for type 1 and type 4, you need 5 hours per year. But type 1 and 9 being asset management, they are in different groups. So if you're licensed for type 1 and 9, you would need 10 CPT hours per year. And the other thing you need to know is what is allowed as CPT. And it's anything that involves interaction with other individuals. So the activities allowed are listed there from attending courses onwards. The activities not allowed: reading financial journals, newspapers, etc., and your normal work. And if that is examined, it will be 1 question in the exam.